Everything I thought I knew about my wife was a lie. The day I uncovered her secret life wasn't just the end of our marriage, it was the start of a revelation that would change my world forever. How many men can honestly say their wife is the kind of person who naturally draws people in, not because she's famous or has a high-profile career, but simply because of her magnetic energy? That was Emily, my wife. She had this presence that turned heads wherever she went. She wasn't a social media influencer or anything like that, but when Emily walked into a room, people noticed, especially men. And I noticed, too. We got married in our mid-20s, and now, as we edge closer to 40, I sometimes reflect on how it all started. We met in college. She was the vibrant, bubbly type who could light up a room, while I was the quieter, introverted guy. Opposites attract, right? And for a while, it worked perfectly. Our early years together were amazing. We got married, bought a house, and eventually had 2 beautiful daughters. It was like the classic suburban dream, me working a standard 9-to-5 office job with decent pay and good benefits, while Emily stayed home, especially when the girls were little. Occasionally, she'd pick up some part-time work, helping an elderly neighbor, doing odd jobs when she felt like it, but mostly, she focused on being there for the kids. Looking back, I'd say our marriage was fine. Not incredible, not terrible, just fine. We weren't the couple who fought constantly, but we weren't one of those lovebirds who couldn't keep their hands off each other either. We lived in this middle ground, making things work, raising the kids, paying the bills, and managing the day-to-day grind. Even our intimacy fell into the same pattern. The physical side of our relationship hadn't completely disappeared, but it wasn't like the passionate early days anymore. It was routine, much like everything else in our lives. And for a long time, I thought that was normal. Isn't that how most marriages go after a while? At least, that's what I told myself. Looking back now, I realize I ignored the signs, not because they were glaringly obvious, but because they were subtle, almost easy to dismiss at first. Emily started going out more often, and the reason seemed innocent enough. Sometimes it was a quick grocery run, other times meeting a friend for coffee, or she'd say she was heading out for a walk. Nothing unusual, at least not initially. But over time, these little outings started stretching longer than expected. When she'd come back, she'd casually say, "Oh, I ran into so-and-so," or, "The lines at the store were ridiculous." And for a while, I didn't question it. Why would I? We'd been married for over a decade, and I trusted her completely. Emily had always been a good wife and an incredible mom. What reason did I have to doubt her? But then, small changes started to creep in. There were more evenings when she'd stay out later than usual. When I'd ask how her day went, her answers felt scripted. Not natural, like they used to be. It was as if she had rehearsed what to say before stepping through the door. I told myself I was overthinking it. Married life sometimes settles into these rhythms, doesn't it? And then there were the phone calls. Emily began spending a lot more time on her phone, texting constantly, sometimes smiling at her screen like a teenager. At first, I figured she was just catching up with friends or planning a mom's night out. But one evening, as I leaned in to kiss her goodnight, she pulled back, saying, "Not now. I'm tired." It stung more than I wanted to admit. I told myself not to take it personally. People get tired. I was tired too. Still, the changes with her phone became harder to ignore. It would ping relentlessly in the evenings, with new messages lighting up the screen. We'd be sitting on the couch together, me half watching some show, and her completely absorbed in whatever was happening on that tiny screen. It wasn't the usual scrolling through social media either, it was messages. At first, I glanced over casually, curious about who she might be talking to. But every time I did, she'd quickly close her phone, like she didn't want me to see. That's when the first real seeds of doubt began to take root. When I got too close to her phone, too close to the truth, that's when the knot in my stomach started forming. But even then, I kept brushing it off, telling myself, no, it's nothing. You're just being paranoid. It wasn't until one night, when the cracks in my denial finally started to show, that I realized how blind I'd been. It was late. I was in bed, supposedly asleep, when I heard her whispering on the phone. It was quiet, barely audible, but just loud enough for me to pick up bits and pieces of the conversation. I couldn't make out much, but what I did hear chilled me. You know I can't right now. He's still awake. Maybe tomorrow. My heart started pounding. A cold sweat formed on my forehead as I lay there, frozen, trying to process what I'd just heard. It didn't sound like her mom. It didn't sound like a casual chat with a friend from work. It sounded wrong. I wanted to leap out of bed, confront her right then and there, and demand to know who she was talking to. But instead, I stayed still, pretending to sleep, my mind racing through every worst-case scenario. Could she be cheating? No. Not Emily. She wouldn't do that. Would she? The next morning, everything seemed perfectly normal. Or at least, Emily acted like it was. She was cheerful as ever, bustling around the house, getting the kids ready for school, kissing me on the cheek as if nothing had happened. But something inside me had shifted. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening, something I wasn't a part of, something she was hiding. From that day on, I started paying closer attention, noticing every small detail, every tiny thing that seemed just a little off. I began asking more questions, subtle at first, careful not to raise suspicion. Who were you talking to last night? I'd ask casually. Or, where exactly did you go today? And every time, Emily had an answer ready, delivered so effortlessly it was almost convincing. Oh, just a friend. Or, I went for a walk, nothing special. But it was something. It was everything. Then one night, the truth started to unravel. I was cleaning up after dinner when her phone buzzed on the counter. She was in the other room, so I picked it up to hand it to her. And that's when I saw the name. It wasn't her mom. It wasn't one of her friends. It was a guy. I didn't recognize the name on her phone at first, but something in my gut told me to open the message. And that's when I saw them, the flirty texts, the playful inside jokes, the winking emojis. My stomach dropped. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Emily, my wife, the mother of my kids, the woman I thought I knew, was having some kind of affair. My hands were trembling as I put the phone back down, trying to keep my face neutral. A moment later, she walked into the kitchen, casual as ever. I couldn't even bring myself to look at her. My mind was reeling, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. Part of me wanted to scream, to confront her right there. But another part, the one still clinging to hope, told me to wait, to figure out what was really going on. For weeks after that, the feeling in my gut only grew stronger, gnawing at me day and night. I kept replaying those texts in my mind, trying to make sense of them. Sure, they were suspicious, no, more than suspicious, but I kept telling myself there could be an explanation. Maybe I was overreacting, jumping to conclusions. I mean, she's my wife. The woman I've built a life with. It couldn't be what it seemed, could it? Then, one day, everything took an unexpected turn. We were out shopping, just a regular trip to pick up groceries. Nothing unusual. I was pushing the cart while Emily wandered off between the aisles, looking for something. As I turned a corner, I caught a glimpse of someone out of the corner of my eye. It was a guy I hadn't seen in years, an old friend from back in the day. Let's call him Tom. He was standing near the shelves, but something about his behavior immediately struck me as odd. He was moving in this jittery, almost evasive way, peeking around the aisle and ducking behind a display, like he didn't want to be seen. At first, I thought I must be imagining things. Why would Tom be acting so strange? Why would he be hiding in a grocery store of all places? But curiosity got the better of me. I left the cart behind and walked over to him. "Tom." I called out. He jumped slightly at the sound of his name, but when he turned around and saw me, he plastered on a smile. "Oh, hey. Long time no see, man." His voice was overly cheerful, the kind of fake enthusiasm that immediately felt off. We exchanged greetings, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He seemed nervous, like he was putting on an act. I glanced around to see if Emily had noticed us, but she was completely unaware, browsing in another aisle. "Everything okay?" I asked, studying his face for a clue. Tom hesitated for a split second, the briefest flicker of unease crossing his face. Yeah, all good," he replied, his voice too bright, too forced. But it wasn't. I could feel it in my gut. Something about the way he was acting, and the timing of it all, didn't sit right with me. I tried to keep it casual, though I couldn't ignore how strange Tom was acting. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to make sense of his nervous behavior. Yeah, I'm good," he replied, but his eyes kept darting around, like he was scanning the aisle for someone. Then he leaned in slightly and lowered his voice. "I actually wanted to talk to you." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Not here," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder like he was being watched. "Let's meet later. There's a bar near the strip mall, you know the one. We can talk there. Tonight." I hesitated. Tom had always been the life of the party, the confident, outgoing type. Seeing him like this, all jittery and tense, felt completely out of character. Part of me didn't want to get involved. Whatever this was, it felt messy, and I had enough on my plate. But there was something in his tone, something urgent that I couldn't ignore. "All right," I said finally, though I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to hear what he had to say. "I'll meet you there." That evening, after putting the kids to bed and telling Emily I had errands to run, I made my way to the bar. When I walked in, I spotted Tom sitting at a corner table, nursing a beer. But this time, he looked completely different, calm, composed, and confident. It was as if the nervous wreck I'd seen in the grocery store earlier had vanished. "Glad you made it," he said with a nod as I slid into the seat across from him. "I had to see what this was all about," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "You've been thinking about me, huh? Should I be flattered?" Tom chuckled softly but didn't take the bait. "Listen," he said, leaning forward. "I'm not trying to make this awkward, but something's going on. Something you need to know about." I frowned, leaning back in my chair. "What are you talking about?" "Everything's fine." He gave me a look, a knowing, almost pitying look, that made my stomach churn. "Trust me," he said, his tone low but serious, "it's not." I felt the weight of his words before he even continued. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be good. I was hooked, the pit in my stomach growing heavier as I waited for Tom to elaborate. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table toward me. I glanced down at it. The card was simple, advertising some massage studio in town. "A massage studio?" I asked, puzzled. "What's this got to do with anything?" Tom's expression was serious, his voice cautious as he spoke. "I've seen your wife there." I raised an eyebrow, trying to stay calm. "Yeah, so?" "She goes there sometimes. Spa treatments, facials, massages, typical stuff. That's nothing new." But Tom shook his head firmly, his eyes fixed on mine. "No, man. I mean she works there." My mind reeled, confusion written all over my face. "What? What are you talking about? She doesn't have massage training. Why would she be working there?" He let out a long sigh, leaning in slightly, as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. "It's not that kind of massage place," he said quietly. "It's a different kind of place. His words hung in the air as I struggled to process what he was implying. "What do you mean, different?" I asked, though part of me already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. Tom hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but he didn't hold back. "It's a massage parlor, yeah, but they offer extras. You know what I mean. It's all under the table, but the women who work there do more than just massages, for cash." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "Your wife, she's one of them. I've seen her there." My chest tightened, my breath catching in my throat. "That doesn't make any sense," I stammered. She's not like that." "Why would she?" My voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Tom leaned back, giving me a look of sympathy. "I talked to one of the girls who works there. She told me your wife's on some kind of floating schedule. Shows up when she can." For a moment, I couldn't say anything. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. The part-time jobs Emily had mentioned, the ones she'd casually brought up over the years, were they really about this? How had I not seen it? The questions piled up in my mind, but there were no answers. Tom stood, finishing his drink. "I'm sorry, man," he said softly, his voice laced with regret. "I thought you deserved to know." And with that, he walked away, leaving me sitting there, staring at the card on the table, my world unraveling in real time. I left the bar feeling like I was walking in a daze, my mind reeling from what Tom had told me. The idea that my wife, the mother of my children, was working in a place like that, doing that kind of work for money, was too much to process. I couldn't make sense of it. This wasn't the Emily I thought I knew. Tom's words kept looping in my head, but no matter how I tried, I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I sat in my car for what felt like forever, staring at nothing, my thoughts racing in 1,000 directions. After about half an hour, I decided I needed to know the truth. Grabbing my keys, I started driving to the massage studio Tom had mentioned. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached the place, wondering what I was about to find. The building seemed ordinary enough, clean, professional, and completely inconspicuous. Inside, the receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, like I was just another client. "Can I help you?" she asked. Yeah," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is anyone available for a massage?" She glanced at the schedule and nodded. "Yes, we have availability. If you'd like to come in, someone will be with you shortly." I nodded, my stomach churning, and followed her instructions. She led me to a room and asked me to lie down on the table. As I waited, the anticipation was unbearable. My thoughts were a jumble of fear, anger, and denial, but I kept telling myself this was all just a misunderstanding, that Tom was wrong. When the massage therapist entered the room, she smiled politely and began the session. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. She rubbed oil on my back and worked her hands into the muscles with practiced precision. It felt like any other massage, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe this wasn't what Tom had been talking about after all. Then, after a few moments, she spoke. "What kind of massage are you looking for today?" she asked, her tone neutral. "We offer therapeutic, relaxing, or maybe you'd like something a little more special." My body went rigid. The words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. This was exactly what Tom had meant. Clearing my throat, I tried to sound casual. Yeah, maybe something more." Without another word, she stopped what she was doing, and the tension in the room shifted instantly. I won't go into the details, but it didn't take long before it became abundantly clear that this wasn't just a regular massage. It ended exactly the way Tom had warned me it would. As I got dressed to leave, my hands were trembling. The confirmation of what this place really was, and the possibility that Emily had been part of it, was more than I could handle. My life, as I knew it, was unraveling right before my eyes. How I had feared it might end, and to my surprise, I didn't stop it. In fact, I went along with it. I let it happen. And as it was happening, I couldn't deny that it felt good. Too good. When it was over, I dressed in silence, handing the woman her payment along with a generous tip. Then I walked out the door as if nothing had happened. But every step I took back to my car felt heavier than the last, the weight of what I had just done sinking deeper into my chest. By the time I got home, the house was quiet. Emily hadn't returned yet, and the kids were still at school. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands trembling slightly, and tried to process everything. The events at the massage studio replayed in my mind, clear as day. Was this what Emily had been doing behind my back? Or was I just projecting, letting my fears and insecurities push me into something I shouldn't have done? Either way, one brutal truth stared me in the face: I wasn't innocent anymore. I sat there for what felt like hours, the dim light from the kitchen window casting long shadows across the walls. The anticipation of Emily walking through that door was bitter, almost unbearable. I wasn't sure what I'd say to her, or if I'd say anything at all. But last night had been a turning point. A revelation. After Emily had come home, kissed me goodnight, and climbed into bed, I had waited. I lay there, listening to the sound of her soft, even breaths as she fell asleep next to me. Once I was sure she was out, I did it. I grabbed her phone. I know there are people who would say that going through her phone crossed a line, that it was a violation of her privacy. And maybe it was. But after everything I'd seen, after what Tom had told me, I didn't care. I needed the truth. My fingers were shaking as I unlocked the phone and scrolled through her messages. At first, there was nothing, just conversations with friends, reminders from the kids' school, and the usual mundane chatter. But then I saw it. A thread that made my stomach drop. I found the texts with Mike. At first, the name didn't register, just another contact in her phone, someone I didn't know. But as I scrolled through their conversations, the truth hit me like a freight train. He wasn't just some client or casual acquaintance. There was tenderness in their messages, a tone of affection that practically leapt off the screen. They weren't just arranging meetings, they were talking late at night, joking, flirting. It wasn't the kind of banter you'd have with a friend. As I read each text, the pit in my stomach grew heavier. This wasn't just about money for Emily. She had feelings for him. This wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I sat in the dimly lit room, waiting for her to come home. Minutes felt like hours as I replayed everything in my head. Finally, I heard the sound of the door creaking open. Emily stepped inside, her eyes fixed on the floor as she entered, probably expecting to see the kids or go about her evening routine. She didn't notice me at first. But when she finally looked up and our eyes met, she froze in place. Her face went pale, and she stood there, unmoving, as the realization washed over her. It wasn't a random client or a stranger sitting there, it was me. David, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I could hear it trembling. I rose from the chair, the weight of everything bearing down on me as I spoke. We need to talk, I said, my voice low but heavy with restrained anger. Her hands came up instinctively, palms out, as if trying to calm the storm she could see brewing. David, please, she began, her voice shaking, it's not what you think. I scoffed bitterly. Not what I think. My voice rose, the emotion spilling out in waves. Let's talk, Emily. Let's talk about how you've been lying to me for God knows how long. About how you've been sneaking around behind my back, working in a place like this. I practically spat the word, my disgust and hurt blending into every syllable. Emily took a hesitant step forward, her eyes pleading. Please, just let me explain. No. I cut her off, my voice sharp as I stood up, towering over her. I don't want to hear your excuses. This isn't just about the money, is it? It's not just the work. It's him. Her expression faltered as I spoke, and I knew I was hitting the mark. Who is Mike, Emily? Or should I say, what is he to you? Her lips parted, but no words came out. The silence that followed was deafening, and I could see the truth written plainly on her face. She didn't need to say anything. I already knew. Sabrina, I said coldly. The name left my mouth like a blade, and Emily flinched as if it had cut her. It's not what you think, she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her tears. But I wasn't moved. My voice was sharp, unrecognizable even to me. I read the texts, Emily, I said, each word biting. You've been talking to him, sharing jokes, flirting. You're in love with this guy, aren't you? You've been around behind my back, with him. She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. No, she sobbed. I swear, it's not like that. It's just. Don't, I interrupted, my voice rising with raw fury. Don't lie to me anymore. I can't do this. I turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. My chest heaved, rage and pain clashing in a storm I could barely contain. But it wasn't enough. Leaving like that didn't feel final. I needed to do more, to take action. Something to make sure she, and everyone involved in this mess, felt the consequences. Emily's betrayal, the lies, the deceit, it was too much to walk away from quietly. My heart pounded as I made my way to the front of the building. My mind was racing, fueled by adrenaline and anger, and I knew I couldn't let this end here. Not after everything I'd just learned. I wasn't only furious with Emily, I wanted to take down this entire operation, this disgusting place that had helped unravel my life. As I approached the front desk, chaos erupted behind me. Fire alarms blared, and within seconds, I saw the receptionist rushing toward the back of the building, shouting something about an evacuation. Perfect. They'd be too distracted now to notice what I was about to do. The desk was empty, and a laptop sat open and unlocked. Without hesitating, I slipped behind it, my fingers flying over the keys. My heart raced as I navigated through files and customer records. This wasn't just about Emily anymore, it was about taking down the whole place. I was determined to expose every sordid detail and make sure it couldn't ruin anyone else's life. I worked quickly, snapping photos of records and messages with my phone. The minutes stretched as I made sure to capture everything. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I imagined the consequences of what I was doing. But I didn't care. This was bigger than just Emily. It was about justice, about retaliation. As I gathered the last piece of evidence and prepared to leave, a voice called out from behind me. My heart froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. I turned slowly, ready to face whatever came next. As I prepared to leave, I spotted another folder on the laptop, this one labeled staff. Something about it drew my attention, and when I opened it, I found another goldmine of information, employee records, photos, schedules, everything. Every woman who worked there was listed, including Sabrina. I snapped pictures of those files too. If this place was going down, I was taking every last person involved with it. The rage fueling me was no longer just about Emily, it was about making sure no one else got away with this. After capturing everything I could, I slipped out of the building, blending into the crowd of people streaming out due to the fire alarm. Once I was in the clear, I knew exactly who to contact, an old friend of mine, a journalist who thrived on uncovering scandals like this. I shot him a quick message, brief but deliberate, I've got something big. You'll want to see this. Call me. When he called back, I laid it all out for him. I didn't mention Emily, that part was too personal, and I wanted to keep it that way. Instead, I told him everything else, about the massage parlor, the VIP clients, the hidden services, and the data I'd stolen from their system. I told him to hold on to it for now, but once the authorities raided the place, I wanted the truth out in the open, every name, every detail. It didn't take long. Within minutes of my call to the police, squad cars arrived, lights flashing, and officers piled out, heading straight for the front door. From a distance, I watched the chaos unfold. This time, it wasn't a drill. This time, it was real. The next few days were a blur of headlines and breaking news. Thanks to my journalist friend, the story blew up almost immediately. Once the raid was confirmed, he published everything: the VIP client lists, the hidden services, the employees, and the whole sordid operation. The massage parlor was exposed for what it truly was, a front for prostitution catering to the wealthy and powerful. The fallout was swift. Arrests were made, clients were named, and key figures in the operation were sent straight to jail. I watched it all unfold, knowing I had played a part in bringing it down. But even as the world took notice, I was left grappling with the personal aftermath. Emily's involvement, her betrayal, it wasn't something I could easily file away, no matter how much justice had been served. I should have felt relief, maybe even satisfaction. After all, I had gotten my revenge. The place that had torn my life apart was gone, and everyone involved was facing the consequences. But as I sat there, scrolling through the news on my phone, reading about the raid and the arrests, all I felt was emptiness. There was a hollow space inside me that no amount of retribution could fill. Emily, or Sabrina, or whatever she wanted to call herself now, was part of that world. No matter how much destruction I caused, no matter how many people I took down, my wife had willingly been a part of it. That thought consumed me, overshadowing any sense of justice I might have felt. At first, I didn't want to tell anyone. It felt too personal, too raw. But the truth was already out there. Trying to hide from it wasn't going to change anything. Friends, neighbors, even colleagues found out through the leaks. Her name wasn't plastered in the headlines, but the whispers and rumors spread like wildfire. People talked. Our mutual friends, the ones who had been part of our lives for years, turned their backs on her almost immediately. They couldn't reconcile the person they thought they knew with the one they'd read about. For Emily, there was no saving face. And for me, there was no salvaging what we'd once had. When it came time to end things, we didn't fight over much. I think we both knew there was no point. The marriage, the trust, the life we'd built together, it was all gone, crumbled into something unrecognizable. Emily tried to talk to me, at first. She wanted to explain, to apologize, to make sense of what she'd done. But I wasn't interested. Her words meant nothing to me anymore. There was nothing she could say that would change the truth of what had happened, nothing that could undo the betrayal that had shattered our lives. So, I let her go. It wasn't easy, but I knew there was no other path forward. The person I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, was gone. And so was the life we had shared. I had already made my decision. I didn't need explanations or excuses. Emily's betrayal cut too deeply, and there was no reason to dwell on why she had done what she did. Her choices had destroyed the foundation of our marriage, and that was enough for me to know. When it came time to end things, we finalized the divorce quietly. There were no loud fights, no messy arguments. Just two people who knew there was nothing left to salvage. For my part, I refused to let the failure of my marriage define me. Life wasn't over, and I wasn't going to spend it stuck in the past. It took time, but eventually, the heaviness I had carried for so long started to ease. What once felt impossible slowly began to feel manageable. And then, almost without realizing it, I was starting fresh. I reached out to old friends I'd lost touch with and let myself be social again. I started carving out time for the things I had neglected for years. Most importantly, I focused on my kids. They became my anchor through everything, and I made sure they understood one thing above all else: no matter what happened between their mom and me, I was never going anywhere. They were my world, and that would never change. Emily. I couldn't say what became of her, and I didn't feel the need to find out. Our lives were completely separate now, and that was how it needed to stay. I've heard bits and pieces, Mutual acquaintances mentioned she was trying to start over somewhere far away, but it hasn't been easy for her. After everything, she lost a lot. The whispers and rumors stuck with her, and rebuilding from that kind of fallout isn't simple. Her reputation took a permanent hit, and honestly, that's not my concern anymore. Those are her struggles, not mine. As for me, I've finally found peace. I've built a new life with structure and purpose. Each day feels like a step toward something brighter. I no longer wake up weighed down by the past, and for the first time in years, I feel free. This chapter of my life may have closed in heartbreak, but the future is open, and this time, it's entirely on my terms.